the early 2000s, Anna Benson's name was often accompanied by words like glamorous, outspoken, and unpredictable. She had once posed as a model, dabbled in reality television, and earned notoriety as the fiery wife of Major League Baseball pitcher Chris Benson. To the outside world, she seemed like a woman who thrived on attention, whether through magazine spreads, television appearances, or bold statements that made her a fixture of gossip columns. But beneath the glitz of her public persona lay a turbulent life, one that would eventually land her behind bars. Anna was born in Mableton, Georgia, and her early years were far removed from the glossy, chaotic life she later embraced. By her late teens, she had started modeling, trying to break into an industry that promised fame and fortune, but often delivered instability and fleeting recognition. What set Anna apart wasn't just her striking looks, but also her brazen attitude. She spoke her mind without hesitation, cultivating an image that was bold, controversial, and often confrontational. In 1999, she married Chris Benson, who was then a promising young pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Together they became a high-profile couple, especially when Anna's personality placed her squarely in the media spotlight. She wasn't just a baseball wife who stood quietly by her husband. Anna was outspoken about her views on relationships, fame, and her own troubled past. In 2004, she appeared on The Howard Stern Show, where she made shocking claims about her personal life, including outrageous threats of infidelity if Chris ever cheated on her. The public was simultaneously scandalized and fascinated. For many, Anna became the embodiment of a modern-day bad girl celebrity, bold, glamorous, and unafraid to shock. Yet behind the sensational headlines was a marriage unraveling under the weight of volatility and mistrust. Friends close to the couple would later describe years of turbulence, arguments, and Anna's increasingly erratic behavior. By 2012, Chris Benson filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The separation triggered a downward spiral for Anna. The fame she once wielded as a weapon against obscurity began to fade, leaving behind financial strain and emotional instability. The breaking point came on July 8, 2013. Anna arrived at Chris's home in suburban Atlanta late at night. She wasn't there for reconciliation or closure. She came armed and armored. Dressed in a bulletproof vest and wielding a gun and metal baton, she stormed inside and confronted her estranged husband. Court documents later revealed that she demanded money, threatened him, and in the chaos brandished the weapon in a terrifying display of rage and desperation. Chris managed to call the police, and when officers arrived, they arrested Anna on charges of aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime, and trespassing. The arrest shocked the public. This wasn't just another tabloid scandal about an outrageous interview or a reality TV stunt. This was a former model and television personality, once photographed in glamorous dresses on red carpets, now sitting in a mugshot, eyes hollow, facing serious prison time. The image was jarring. A woman who had once embodied glitz and bravado, reduced to an emblem of self-destruction. During her court appearances, Anna's legal team argued that her actions were fueled by emotional turmoil and the collapse of her marriage. She pled guilty to aggravated assault and was sentenced to 15 years of probation, narrowly avoiding a lengthy prison term. However, her troubles were far from over. By 2016, she had violated the terms of her probation and was sentenced to several years in prison. The glamorous life she once flaunted had crumbled into a harsh reality of confinement. Media coverage of Anna's downfall painted a stark contrast between her former life and her new one. Stories that once highlighted her flamboyant personality and designer wardrobe were replaced by reports of her prison term and struggles with addiction. The woman who once posed for glossy photos and captivated talk show audiences was now confined to an orange jumpsuit and gray walls, her fame a distant memory. The public's fascination with Anna Benson wasn't simply about her crime, it was about the trajectory of her life. How did a woman who once had access to wealth, fame, and a platform for self-expression end up on the wrong side of the law? Some blamed her temper, others pointed to her troubled upbringing, and many believed her thirst for notoriety became her undoing. Whatever the explanation, Anna's story remains one of the most vivid examples of how fame can magnify flaws and accelerate a descent into chaos. Today, when people remember Anna Benson, it is not for her modeling career or her appearances on reality television. She is remembered for the night she stormed her estranged husband's home in a bulletproof vest with a gun in her hand, an image that became symbolic of her collapse. Her story is both cautionary and haunting, a reminder that behind the shine of celebrity, personal demons can fester unchecked, waiting for the moment when everything unravels. Her journey from runway lights to prison cells reflects the fragility of fame. In Anna Benson's life, trust ended long before crime began, but crime made sure her legacy would never escape it. Tabby Brown was a name that once carried the allure of glamour and possibility. Born in South London in 1985, she grew up with aspirations that stretched far beyond the streets she called home. By her 20s, she had carved a space for herself in the competitive world of modeling, a career marked by glossy magazine shoots, music video appearances, and even a feature in Playboy. For a while, it seemed as though she was on the path so many young women dreamed of: fame, admiration, and a seat at the table of high-profile celebrity culture. But the lights of the fashion world can be deceptive, casting shadows where temptation lurks, and for Tabby, those shadows would ultimately lead to her downfall. Her career began with promise. With striking beauty and undeniable confidence, Tabby became a favorite for UK glamour magazines like Nuts and Zoo, publications that dominated the British men's magazine market in the early 2000s. She wasn't just a model, though she had a magnetic presence that made her a fixture in music videos, appearing alongside artists in the UK's thriving hip-hop and R&B scene. These appearances expanded her fame, turning her into a recognizable face both on the page and on the screen. But her notoriety grew not only from her career but also from her high-profile relationships. Tabby's romantic links to famous footballers, including Raheem Sterling and Mario Balotelli, made her a regular subject of tabloid stories. The press framed her as a socialite, someone who seamlessly moved between the worlds of fashion, sport, and celebrity. She played the role well: luxury cars, lavish parties, glamorous nights out. To the public, it seemed as though Tabby had achieved the dream life. What most people didn't see, however, was how fragile that dream really was. Modeling is a notoriously unstable profession. A career built on looks and public attention can quickly fade as new faces take the spotlight. Beneath the surface, financial pressures and the pressure to maintain appearances mounted. For someone like Tabby, who had tasted the highs of attention and fame, the idea of slipping back into obscurity was terrifying. And in that desperation, opportunities that promised quick money became increasingly appealing. It was around this time that Tabby became involved with men connected to London's underground drug trade. At first, her involvement seemed peripheral. Social circles blending, late-night parties where drugs and fast money were always present. But those environments are dangerous, and her proximity to that world soon turned into participation. Police investigations later revealed that Tabby was not just a passive bystander. She became directly involved in trafficking cocaine, a role that saw her using her beauty and social status as cover. Few would suspect a woman who graced the cover of magazines to be involved in organized crime. But the facade couldn't hold forever. In 2013, authorities launched a targeted operation to crack down on drug trafficking networks across London. Tabby's name came up during surveillance, and when she was finally caught, the details were damning. She had been moving significant quantities of narcotics, playing a critical role in the supply chain. The woman once photographed in designer dresses was now being photographed in handcuffs. When her case went to trial, the media descended on the courtroom. Tabloids that once celebrated her beauty now splashed her mugshot across their pages, the contrast between her past and present impossible to ignore. Headlines screamed of a Playboy model turned drug mule, a sensational collapse that fascinated and horrified readers in equal measure. In court, prosecutors painted a picture of someone who had squandered her opportunities, choosing greed and easy money over hard-earned success. Tabby, once used to the attention of flashing cameras, now sat quietly as judges and juries dismantled the life she had built. Her sentencing marked the end of her glamorous public persona. Gone were the glossy spreads and nightclub appearances. In their place were years behind bars, time served not in luxury but in confinement. For those who knew her only as a model, the transformation was shocking. For those who understood the pressures and temptations of fame, it was sadly predictable. Tabby's imprisonment became more than just a personal tragedy. It became a public parable. Commentators pointed to her story as evidence of how the lure of fame can sometimes lead young models into destructive choices. Others focused on the systemic issues of the modeling industry, where women are often discarded once their peak fades, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation. When she was eventually released, Tabby faced a world that no longer viewed her as a rising star. She tried to rebuild, to reclaim some part of her life beyond the shadow of her criminal conviction. But the stigma was permanent. In an industry obsessed with image, her image was one forever tied to scandal. Friends and fans often spoke of her as someone who had potential, but became lost in the maze of temptation and self-destruction. Tabby Brown passed away suddenly in 2022 at just 38 years old, her life cut short before she had the chance to truly rewrite her story. Though the exact cause of her death was not publicly confirmed, the news stunned those who remembered her not just for her crime, but for the vibrant, magnetic personality that had once made her shine in magazines and music videos. Her legacy became a complicated one, both a reminder of beauty and charm, and a warning about the fragility of fame when coupled with reckless choices. In the end, Tabby's story is not simply one of a model who went from fame to prison. It is the story of a woman who lived fast, chased glamour, and became entangled in a world that promised wealth but delivered ruin. Her downfall was public, her redemption unfinished, and her death a sobering reminder of how quickly the lights of fame can flicker out. Lorraine Gilles was not a household name like some of the other women who graced magazine covers or runways, but her beauty and presence gave her an edge in the modeling world that allowed her to climb social circles quickly. Born in Germany, she had ambitions of making it big in the entertainment industry. Modeling gave her both visibility and confidence, and she used her looks to open doors that others might have found closed. For a time, it seemed as if her life would follow the path of countless models before her. Photo shoots, promotional work, and the occasional opportunity to rub shoulders with the famous. But for Lorraine, the lines between personal ambition, scandal, and crime blurred until she crossed a point of no return. Her name first exploded into public consciousness during the sensational divorce case of Mel B, the former Spice Girl, and her husband, Stephen Belafonte. Lorraine had been employed as their nanny, a position that brought her into the private world of a high-profile couple. What began as a job soon became something far more complex. Court documents revealed allegations of affairs, manipulation, and a tangled web of personal relationships that placed Lorraine squarely at the center of one of the most publicized celebrity divorces of the decade. Her modeling background, combined with her beauty, only intensified the attention. Photographs of her circulated in tabloids, painting her as both a seductress and an opportunist. But the scandal with Mel B was only one layer of Lorraine's story. While much of the media focused on the salacious details of the divorce case, few were aware of the darker path Lorraine had already begun to walk. Investigators in Europe later uncovered that she had engaged in fraudulent schemes and theft, using her position of trust to manipulate and exploit those around her. Her modeling image, poised, polished, and photogenic, became the perfect disguise. To outsiders, she was glamorous, someone who fit naturally into wealthy environments. To those who trusted her, she projected charm and reliability. That duality gave her leverage, but it also made her betrayals all the more cutting. Victims of her schemes spoke about how blindsided they felt, describing her as someone who had used her beauty and status to mask calculated dishonesty. Fraudulent transactions, siphoning of funds, and manipulative tactics created a pattern that was impossible to ignore. When the truth came to light, it was not the story of a naive young woman caught in unfortunate circumstances. Instead, prosecutors argued it was the story of a woman who had knowingly taken advantage of others for her own gain. By the time Lorraine faced legal consequences, the tabloid fascination with her role in Mel B's divorce resurfaced, this time reframed through the lens of crime. The world that once viewed her as the nanny at the center of celebrity drama now saw her as a convicted criminal. The juxtaposition was stark. Glossy images of Lorraine dressed in stylish outfits alongside grim photographs from court appearances where her fate was no longer in her own hands. Her trial attracted significant attention, not just because of the charges but because of the larger-than-life persona the media had built around her. For some, she became a symbol of betrayal, someone who had infiltrated a celebrity household, manipulated relationships, and later exploited others financially. For others, her story was less about crime and more about the destructive pull of ambition, where the need for money and recognition can twist into criminal desperation. When sentencing was handed down, Lorraine's future shifted irrevocably. Prison replaced the glossy lifestyle, and her name became permanently tied to deception. The same press that once painted her as glamorous now immortalized her as a cautionary tale. Friends from her past modeling days spoke with shock, describing how they could never have imagined her life taking such a turn. But those who had been closer to her acknowledged a darker streak, ambition that sometimes edged into ruthlessness, a determination to get ahead no matter the cost. Her imprisonment forced the public to confront uncomfortable questions. How much of her downfall was a result of her own choices, and how much was the product of an industry and culture that rewards appearances and connections above substance? Lorraine's story blurred the line between scandal and crime, making it hard to separate her role in celebrity gossip from her reality as a convicted fraudster. For Lorraine herself, the transformation was complete. Whatever aspirations she once had in modeling or entertainment were gone, replaced by the label of criminal. Her reputation, forever tied to scandal and betrayal, meant there was no easy path back into the public's good graces. Looking back, Lorraine Gill's story is not just about one woman's descent into crime. It is about how beauty and ambition, when mixed with poor choices and moral compromise, can create a life built on deception. She had access to opportunity, connections to fame, and the tools to build a sustainable career, but she chose a path of exploitation instead. The result was inevitable: prison time, public disgrace, and a legacy forever marked by scandal. Her story is chilling because it demonstrates how easily appearances can deceive. Lorraine Gilles was once photographed as the glamorous face at celebrity parties and on modeling shoots, but behind the camera flashes, she was weaving a web that would ultimately ensnare her. Her fall serves as a reminder that the world of fame and beauty is not always what it seems, and sometimes it hides choices that lead straight to a prison cell. Suzanne von Richthofen's story is one of the most infamous criminal cases in Brazil's modern history, a tale so shocking that it continues to haunt the nation decades later. She was not a professional model in the strict sense, but her striking beauty, privilege, and media presence gave her the kind of public visibility often associated with models and socialites. Her face, once admired in photographs of a wealthy young woman from São Paulo's elite, would soon become inseparable from the brutal murder of her own parents, a crime she not only condoned but carefully orchestrated. Suzanne was born in 1983 into one of Brazil's most privileged families. Her father, Manfred von Richthofen, was a respected engineer of German descent, and her mother, Mauricia, was a psychiatrist. Together they built a life of wealth and comfort in São Paulo, raising Suzanne in an environment of financial security and opportunity. The family's home was lavish, her education private, and her lifestyle enviable. To outsiders, it looked like the perfect upbringing, a young woman blessed with intelligence, charm, and every advantage money could buy. But Suzanne was restless. By her late teens, she fell into a relationship with Daniel Cravinhos, a young man from a less privileged background who shared her rebellious streak. To Suzanne's parents, Daniel was entirely unsuitable. He came from a modest family, was seen as lazy, and was deeply immersed in drugs and motorcycle culture. Manfred and Mauricia disapproved, fearing that he would derail their daughter's future. The more they tried to pull her away, the more determined Suzanne became to stay with him. What began as teenage defiance grew into an obsession, and soon, Suzanne and Daniel began to see her parents not just as obstacles, but as enemies. By 2002, tension in the household had reached unbearable levels. Suzanne's parents had threatened to cut her off financially if she continued the relationship. For Suzanne, who had grown accustomed to a life of privilege, the thought of losing that comfort was intolerable. In Daniel, she found both validation and a partner willing to take drastic measures. Together, with Daniel's brother Christian, they began to plot the unthinkable, the murder of Manfred and Mauricia. On the night of October 31, 2002, Suzanne carried out her plan. She invited her parents to dinner, maintaining a facade of normalcy. Later that night, while her parents slept in their luxurious São Paulo home, Daniel and Christian entered the house. Suzanne unlocked the doors and deliberately removed the family's guard dog to ensure nothing interfered. Then she quietly withdrew to wait in another room. With iron bars, Daniel and Christian brutally attacked Manfred and Mauricia as they slept, bludgeoning them to death. The scene was horrifying. Blood spattered across the bedroom, evidence of a crime committed with raw violence. Suzanne, the daughter who had lived in that house under her parents' care, had facilitated the entire thing. Afterward, the trio staged the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. They scattered items around the house and fled, hoping police would believe the story. Suzanne even returned later, playing the role of the grieving daughter, crying in front of neighbors and investigators, trying to mask her involvement. But investigators quickly grew suspicious. There were no signs of forced entry, and the family dog, normally protective, had been strangely absent. Within days, inconsistencies in Suzanne's statements and the suspicious behavior of the Crevignos brothers led to confessions. The revelation shocked Brazil. The case was unlike anything the nation had seen. A young woman from privilege, beautiful and seemingly innocent, accused of orchestrating her parents' brutal murders for money and freedom. The media swarmed the case, publishing photographs of Suzanne that highlighted the stark contrast between her polished exterior and the heinous crime she had committed. To many, she embodied betrayal itself, a daughter who turned against the very people who gave her everything. The trial became a media spectacle. Every detail was scrutinized: her relationship with Daniel, her motives, her demeanor in court. Some journalists noted how calm and composed she appeared, almost detached from the gravity of the charges. Prosecutors argued that Suzanne's motive was clear. She wanted her parents' inheritance and the freedom to live with Daniel without their interference. The brutality of the crime underscored how far she was willing to go. In 2006, Suzanne was convicted alongside Daniel and Christian. She received a sentence of 39 years in prison. For many Brazilians, the sentence was both a relief and a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath privilege and beauty. Suzanne, who once could have lived a life of wealth and opportunity, was now confined behind bars, her name forever synonymous with betrayal and murder. Her life in prison drew continued media fascination. Periodically, reports surfaced about her behavior, relationships with other inmates, and attempts to appeal her sentence. She became one of Brazil's most notorious prisoners, her story retold in documentaries, books, and dramatizations. Even decades later, public opinion remained divided between those who saw her as a cold-blooded murderer and those who speculated about possible manipulation by Daniel. But the evidence remained damning. She had planned her parents' deaths and played a central role in their execution. What made Suzanne's case so chilling wasn't just the crime itself, but the image it shattered. She had been the picture of privilege, a well-dressed, educated young woman with her entire future ahead of her. To see such a figure calmly engineer the destruction of her family forced people to confront unsettling truths. Beauty and wealth, it seemed, could not guarantee morality. Behind the polished photographs was a daughter capable of orchestrating one of the most brutal crimes in Brazilian history. Today, Suzanne von Richthofen's story continues to resonate as one of Brazil's most haunting true crime tales. She serves her sentence, her name etched permanently into the national memory. Once photographed as a picture of youthful beauty, she is now remembered as the woman who chose inheritance over family, freedom over morality, and in doing so destroyed the lives of those who gave her everything. Her story is a stark reminder of how ambition, love, and greed can twist into something monstrous. Suzanne's journey from privilege to prison is not just a personal tragedy, it is a chilling warning of how quickly the line between innocence and brutality can be crossed. Victoria Nasirova's story reads like something out of a dark thriller, yet every part of it is disturbingly real. She was a Russian-born beauty who once basked in the attention that came with modeling, photo shoots, and a lifestyle designed for envy. Behind the lens, she projected charm, elegance, and allure, qualities that made her stand out in the glamorous world she craved. But beneath that polished exterior was a woman consumed by greed, manipulation, and a dangerous disregard for the lives of others. Born in Krasnodar, Russia, in 1975, Victoria grew up with aspirations larger than the quiet neighborhoods that surrounded her. She was attractive, bold, and ambitious, qualities that would later draw people to her, but also shield her darker impulses. By her 20s, she was living in Moscow, moving in circles where beauty could open doors, whether in modeling gigs or in relationships with wealthy men who could finance her desires. Money and luxury fascinated her, and she seemed to know instinctively how to exploit her looks and charm to obtain them. But Victoria's ambitions weren't simply about achieving success through hard work. She cultivated a life of manipulation, learning how to take advantage of others for personal gain. In Russia, her name began circulating not for her beauty, but for something much darker. In 2014, she became a suspect in the mysterious death of her neighbor, Alla Alexenko. Authorities accused Victoria of drugging and killing the woman, then burning her body in a horrific attempt to erase evidence. Though investigators closed in on her, Victoria fled Russia before she could be prosecuted. That act alone would set her on a path of crime that would follow her across continents. By the mid-2010s, Victoria had relocated to the United States, settling in New York. There she began to reinvent herself, using her looks and charm to slip into the city's Russian-speaking immigrant community. She posted glamorous photographs on social media, fur coats, jewelry, selfies designed to project the image of a confident woman who had it all. But beneath the curated images was someone still willing to use deceit and crime as her means of survival. One of her most notorious crimes in America unfolded in 2016, and it sounded like something out of a fairy tale twisted into nightmare. Victoria had grown envious of another Russian woman living in New York, a young beautician named Olga Tsvik. Olga was not only attractive, but also bore a striking resemblance to Victoria. That resemblance sparked a sinister idea. Victoria decided she would poison Olga with a cake laced with a powerful sedative, kill her, and steal her identity. By assuming Olga's life, Victoria could potentially erase her own criminal past and secure a fresh start under someone else's name. The plan was chilling in its detail. Victoria purchased a cheesecake, a sweet, seemingly innocent gift, and delivered it to Olga, posing as a friend. Olga, touched by the gesture, ate some of the dessert. Almost immediately, she began to feel dizzy, weak, and overwhelmed. She collapsed, losing consciousness. Victoria had spiked the cheesecake with phenazepam, a potent Russian tranquilizer not commonly known in the United States. As Olga lay unconscious in her queen's apartment, Victoria staged the scene to make it look like a suicide. Pills were scattered around the bed, and attempts were made to erase fingerprints. Victoria then stole Olga's valuables, including cash and identification documents, and left her there, believing she would not survive. But fate intervened. Olga didn't die. Neighbors found her and called for help, and after treatment, she recovered. When she awoke and pieced together the events, suspicion turned quickly toward Victoria. Investigators began digging into Victoria's past, and the threads of her crimes began to unravel. The attempted murder of Olga was not her only transgression. Authorities discovered evidence linking her to fraud schemes, identity theft, and the earlier suspicions surrounding her neighbor's death in Russia. Her glamorous social media persona was revealed to be a facade covering years of manipulation and violence. The case drew international media attention. The image of a glamorous Russian woman trying to poison someone with a cheesecake was almost surreal. Yet it underscored the ruthlessness Victoria carried behind her carefully constructed charm. Prosecutors described her as a predator, someone who exploited beauty and trust for her own survival. In 2019, after a lengthy investigation and trial, Victoria Nazarova was found guilty of attempted murder, assault, and other charges related to the poisoning of Olga. The trial painted her as a manipulative figure who showed no remorse, and witnesses testified to her history of deception. In 2023, she was sentenced to 21 years in prison. For many, the sentence symbolized justice, not only for Olga, but also for the countless others Victoria had deceived or harmed along her path. What made her story resonate was not just the crime itself, but the way it collided with her outward image. Victoria had lived much of her life projecting beauty and sophistication, the kind of persona admired in modeling circles and envied on social media. Yet behind the lens was a woman willing to destroy lives to maintain her own comfort. She was a fugitive, a con artist, and ultimately a would-be murderer who used sweetness as a weapon, literally serving poison under the guise of cake. The fall of Victoria Nazarova is chilling because it forces us to confront the gap between appearance and reality. The photographs of her in furs, makeup perfectly applied, now stand in stark contrast to the mugshots taken after her arrest. The woman who once presented herself as untouchable glamour is now confined behind prison walls, her name synonymous not with beauty but with betrayal and cruelty. Her story is a reminder of how far some will go to preserve the image they've built, how appearances can mask a ruthless drive for survival, and how easily charm can transform into manipulation. Victoria once walked the runway of life as if she owned it. Today, she paces the narrow space of a prison cell, serving the price for crimes as shocking as they were cold-blooded. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Amanda Knox's name is one of the most infamous in modern crime history, not because she sought fame, but because fame found her under the darkest possible circumstances. She had been an American student abroad, a young woman in her early 20s living out the dream of studying in Italy, soaking in the beauty of Perugia with its medieval cobblestone streets, bustling piazzas, and intoxicating mix of art and culture. She had come from Seattle with aspirations of learning, exploring, and simply being young in a foreign land. For Amanda, it was supposed to be a chapter of self-discovery. Instead, it became the story that defined her life, casting her into international headlines, courtrooms, and prisons in a way that no model of ambition could ever imagine. In 2007, Amanda was living in a shared house with other students, including Meredith Kircher, a bright and promising British student. The two young women, though not the closest of friends, shared the kind of camaraderie that naturally develops among international students navigating new worlds. Meredith was known for her kindness, her intelligence, and the promise of a future cut far too short. On the night of November 1st, 2007, Meredith was brutally murdered in their shared home. Her body was discovered with multiple stab wounds, her room showing signs of a violent struggle. The crime was horrifying, a nightmare that tore through the small Italian university town. Police and forensic teams descended on the scene, and the search for answers quickly escalated into a global media circus. Amanda Knox and her then-boyfriend, Raffaele Solicito, became prime suspects almost immediately. To Italian investigators, their demeanor seemed odd. Amanda's behavior, which included kissing Raffaele outside the crime scene and performing cartwheels at the police station, struck them as inappropriate, even sinister. The media seized upon these details, twisting them into a narrative of a cold, remorseless femme fatale. Italian tabloids branded her Foxy Noxy, a nickname from her soccer days that now took on a menacing connotation. The prosecution built a story that was as sensational as it was shaky. They argued that Amanda, Raffaele, and another man, Rudy Geddy, had been involved in a twisted sexual encounter gone wrong, culminating in Meredith's murder. The alleged motive shifted often, sometimes jealousy, sometimes drugs, sometimes sheer thrill-seeking. But what remained consistent was the focus on Amanda as the centerpiece of this imagined debauchery. Evidence against her was flimsy and later discredited, but at the time it seemed damning. A kitchen knife found in Raffaele's apartment was said to match Meredith's wounds, and police claimed it bore Amanda's DNA on the handle and Meredith's on the blade. However, forensic experts would later reveal that the supposed traces of Meredith's DNA were so minute they should never have been considered reliable. Other evidence, like a bra clasp found weeks later in the crime scene, was contaminated and mishandled. Yet despite these glaring flaws, the narrative stuck. In 2009, Amanda Knox and Raffaele Solicito were convicted of Meredith's murder. Amanda received a 26-year prison sentence. She was just 22 years old. The verdict sent shockwaves through the world. To some, she was a villain, a manipulative woman whose smile hid a capacity for violence. To others, she was a scapegoat, a young woman trapped in a flawed justice system and vilified by a ravenous press. Prison in Italy was a brutal reality for Amanda. She endured isolation, fear, and the crushing weight of being painted as a monster by much of the global media. Letters from her time behind bars later revealed the mental torment she suffered, clinging to books and writing as a way to preserve her sanity. For 4 years, she lived under the shadow of a conviction that seemed to define her entire existence. But the fight for Amanda's freedom never ceased. Appeals were filed and legal teams worked tirelessly to expose the cracks in the case. In 2011, an appeals court acquitted Amanda and Raffaele, citing a complete lack of credible evidence. Amanda returned home to the United States, greeted by supporters who saw her as a survivor of injustice. Yet the story was far from over. In 2013, Italy's highest court ordered a retrial. Amanda and Raffaele were once again convicted in 2014, only to have that conviction overturned definitively by Italy's Supreme Court in 2015. After 8 long years, Amanda was finally officially exonerated of Meredith Kircher's murder. The court acknowledged the grave errors in the investigation and prosecution, effectively declaring Amanda innocent of the crime that had consumed her life. Still, the damage had been done. Amanda Knox's name remained synonymous with murder in the minds of many. The nickname Foxy Knoxy continued to haunt her, a tabloid invention that reduced her humanity to a caricature. Even in freedom, she found herself imprisoned by the court of public opinion. For Amanda, rebuilding life after prison meant confronting a world that would never truly let her escape the shadow of Perugia. She wrote a memoir, spoke publicly about her ordeal, and became an advocate for criminal justice reform. She married, had children, and tried to reclaim her identity beyond the headlines. Yet the haunting question remains: how much of her story is about Amanda herself, and how much is about the world's obsession with turning tragedy into spectacle? The murder of Meredith Kircher was a tragedy beyond comprehension, and Amanda Knox's entanglement in the case revealed the flaws of a justice system swayed by media narratives and cultural biases. Whether people see Amanda as a victim or remain skeptical, her story forces us to confront how quickly suspicion, appearances, and the hunger for sensationalism can destroy lives. Amanda Knox was not the glamorous model that tabloids often fixated on, but she became a symbol of how easily women can be objectified, vilified, and turned into archetypes, whether angel or demon, by a world hungry for drama. In her case, the cost of that hunger was nearly a lifetime in prison for a crime she did not commit. Angela Coates never set out to be infamous. She had once dreamed of glamour, lights, and fashion spreads, chasing the kind of modeling career that promised both admiration and stability. For a time, she managed to step into that world. Born in Georgia, she possessed a striking beauty that translated well into photo shoots. Her features carried a charisma that cameras loved, something that brought her opportunities as a model, and later a brief spotlight as a magazine cover girl. For young women like Angela, the modeling industry represented a ticket to something bigger, an escape from the ordinary. But in 2014, Angela's name reached the public not for her modeling achievements, but for something entirely different: a mugshot. She had been arrested in Georgia on a charge of disorderly conduct, a relatively minor offense that usually wouldn't make headlines. Yet when her booking photo was released, it instantly went viral. With her sharp cheekbones, flawless skin, and captivating expression, Angela's mugshot looked less like an image from a police file and more like a professional photo shoot. Within hours, social media had dubbed her the prettiest convict in America. The internet fascination with her mugshot thrust Angela into an unwanted kind of fame. Articles, memes, and online posts spread her image across platforms worldwide. Some saw her beauty as ironic, given the circumstances of her arrest. Others romanticized her as a kind of fallen angel, a woman too beautiful to belong behind bars. People shared her photo not out of concern for her life, but as entertainment. Angela herself expressed frustration in later interviews, noting how demeaning it felt to be reduced to a viral image when the reality was far less glamorous. But Angela's troubles extended beyond that one arrest. Like many who find sudden internet notoriety, her life became increasingly complicated. While the mugshot had briefly turned her into a viral sensation, it also exposed her to scrutiny and questions about her choices. Her arrest was part of a pattern of run-ins with law enforcement that chipped away at the polished image she had tried to build through modeling. What should have been a momentary stumble turned into a lasting shadow over her career. The darker truth of Angela's life emerged in the years that followed. Opportunities in modeling dwindled as her name became more associated with the mugshot than her work. Employers and agencies hesitated to work with someone linked to scandal. She was no longer the promising young woman on magazine covers, but rather a cautionary tale of how quickly public perception could change. Her beauty, which had once been her ticket into the modeling world, became a curse when paired with criminal records and media exploitation. The irony was cruel. The very mugshot that should have marked her lowest point had also been the photo that catapulted her into global attention. Yet instead of elevating her, it trapped her in a cycle of notoriety she couldn't escape. Angela herself reflected on how damaging that viral moment had been. While some celebrated her looks, few cared about her struggles, what led to her arrest, what challenges she faced, or how she could rebuild her life. Over time, Angela faced the reality of how unforgiving both the justice system and public perception can be. Her time in prison, brief compared to more serious offenders, was still a sobering experience. The loss of freedom, the stigma of incarceration, and the sudden shift from admired model to mocked felon left scars that were not easily erased. When she emerged from those years, Angela's life was forever altered. Modeling offers no guarantees even under the best circumstances, and for someone with a criminal record, the chances of success became slim. The internet had already decided her role in the cultural imagination. Not a model, not a woman with aspirations, but a viral mugshot, an image forever circulating with captions and jokes she had no control over. Her story lingers because it illustrates how fragile the line is between fame and infamy. Angela Coates was undeniably beautiful, a woman who had once graced the covers of magazines, but beauty could not shield her from the consequences of poor choices. Nor could it protect her from a world eager to consume her downfall as entertainment. For Angela, prison was not just about punishment for a crime. It was about losing control of her narrative, about being reduced to a symbol instead of a person. Today, her name surfaces less often, but the mugshot remains alive online, passed around like a meme that refuses to die. Behind that image is a woman who once dreamed of runway lights and editorial spreads, now remembered primarily for a fleeting moment of notoriety. Angela Coates's story is haunting not because of the crime itself, which was minor, but because of what it revealed about society's obsession with beauty, scandal, and downfall. It is a reminder that fame can come from the unlikeliest of places, but when it does, it may not be the kind of fame anyone would want. For Angela, the mugshot that went viral was both her crown and her curse, a reminder that behind every viral image lies a real person whose life is far more complicated than a single photograph can convey. As Marie Livingston's life began with dreams rooted in performance and art, not in scandal. Born Ashley Marie Livingston in California in 1986, she grew up knowing that she wanted to be seen, not for notoriety, but for her talent and creativity. Modeling came first, a path that let her showcase her androgynous beauty, striking features, and fierce runway presence. She broke into the public eye through America's Next Top Model, British Invasion in 2012, where her confidence, tattoos, and unapologetic individuality won her fans. Even after her elimination, she stood out as someone destined for more than a modeling career. As Marie didn't stop at modeling, she pursued acting and music, appearing in shows like Empire and building a reputation as a bold, creative force. In an industry that thrives on conformity, she brought authenticity. She represented queer voices, challenged beauty norms, and embodied a rare blend of resilience and artistry. For a while, her trajectory looked unstoppable. She had carved a niche for herself as a model, actress, and musician who could inspire others simply by existing on her own terms. But success, fame, and ambition often walk hand in hand with temptation. For as Marie, the cracks began to show in her personal life. By the late 2010s, whispers of reckless decisions and unhealthy coping mechanisms started to circulate. The pressures of maintaining a public image, balancing multiple careers, and navigating fame's emotional toll took their toll. Behind the camera lights and stage performances was a woman grappling with real struggles that would eventually lead her into a prison cell. The turning point came when she was arrested on charges connected to drugs and possession. For someone who had built a career on defiance and individuality, it wasn't the kind of rebellion that inspired, it was the kind that destroyed. Reports detailed how Marie had been caught with illegal substances during a traffic stop, her arrest sparking headlines that shifted the narrative from her artistry to her downfall. The news shocked many who admired her. To fans, Marie wasn't just another model. She had been a symbol of pride, strength, and individuality in an industry where such qualities often go unrewarded. Seeing her name attached to criminal charges felt like betrayal to some and heartbreak to others. It also highlighted how fragile the path of fame can be. One wrong decision, one reckless night, and years of hard work can be undone. Her time in prison was brief compared to some, but for Marie, it was transformative. The reality of incarceration stripped away the glamour, leaving only the cold truth of consequences. She went from standing in front of cameras to standing in front of judges, from the freedom of artistic expression to the confinement of prison walls. For someone used to controlling her image, the mugshot became the cruel equalizer, a photo that told the world her mistakes louder than her art ever had. When she emerged, Marie faced a difficult question: how to rebuild. The entertainment industry rarely forgives, and public opinion often remembers only the scandal. Yet she did not vanish. She used her voice to speak about personal growth, accountability, and the need to recognize that fame doesn't protect anyone from consequences. For some, her arrest became part of her story of resilience, proof that even those who fall can rise again, scarred but stronger. Still, the damage lingers. Marie's career never regained the same momentum it had before the arrest. Opportunities that once came easily became harder to secure. The shadow of prison clung to her, a reminder of choices made under pressure and pain. And yet, her story remains unique because she didn't allow herself to be defined solely by her mistakes. She leaned into her truth, continuing to create and perform, knowing that rebuilding was a slower climb than the meteoric rise she once enjoyed. Marie Livingston's story stands out in the world of models who went from fame to prison because it isn't about a con, a violent act, or a long history of deception. It's about human fragility. It's about how someone who seemed untouchable, confident, defiant, larger than life, could stumble like anyone else. Her downfall wasn't as sensational as others, but it was deeply human, a reminder that no amount of beauty, talent, or fame shields a person from their own struggles. In the end, her prison time is only one chapter in her life. Marie remains a figure who represents the complexity of ambition, the weight of mistakes, and the resilience of those who refuse to be defined by their lowest moments. Her story forces us to see the humanity behind the headlines. A young woman who reached great heights, fell hard, and continues to climb again, carrying both her scars and her strength. Paris Hilton's life has always been a performance played out under the brightest of lights. Born into wealth and privilege in 1981, the great-granddaughter of hotel magnate Conrad Hilton, she was raised in the opulence of New York and Beverly Hills. Her childhood was marked by luxury, but also by the rigid expectations of a family whose name carried weight across the world. By the time she was a teenager, Paris had begun to rebel against that rigid structure. Modeling became her escape, her way of crafting her own identity. By her late teens and early 20s, she was one of the most photographed women on earth, an heiress turned model turned socialite whose every move fascinated tabloids. She graced magazine covers, walked runways, and embodied the early 2000s era of reality TV fame. With The Simple Life, she turned herself into a pop culture phenomenon. Her blonde hair, designer outfits, and catchphrases made her a symbol of excess and celebrity culture. Paris Hilton wasn't just a model. She was a brand, a lifestyle, and for some, the definition of famous for being famous. But beneath the glittering facade was a young woman spiraling into reckless choices that would eventually land her in a prison cell. In 2006, Paris was arrested for driving under the influence after being pulled over in Hollywood. The arrest was shocking, not because a celebrity had been caught drinking and driving. That was hardly unheard of, but because it clashed so starkly with her public image of untouchable glamour. She was sentenced to probation, alcohol education classes, and community service. For many, it seemed like a wake-up call that might steer her life back on course. But Paris's defiance outweighed her caution. In early 2007, she was caught driving on a suspended license, a direct violation of her probation. The Los Angeles courts had little patience for repeated infractions, and soon she was sentenced to 45 days in jail. The announcement sent a media frenzy into overdrive. Photographers crowded the courthouse, tabloids splashed headlines across covers, and news stations broadcast every detail. The heiress who once floated through nightclubs and catwalks now faced the prospect of trading couture for a prison jumpsuit. In June 2007, Paris reported to the Century Regional Detention Facility in Linwood, California. Her first days were chaotic. Initially, she was released after only a few days due to medical concerns, sparking outrage from the public and accusations of preferential treatment. The backlash was so severe that the judge ordered her back to prison to serve her sentence in full. This time, there would be no early release. Behind bars, Paris experienced a reality far removed from the glamorous world she had curated. Reports described her as withdrawn and shaken, struggling with the harsh conditions of prison life. The stark walls, lack of privacy, and rigid routines stripped away the image of a carefree heiress. Her meals were basic, her clothes identical to every other inmate's, and her time was dictated by rules she couldn't bend. The contrast between her life outside and her reality inside became a fixation for the press, who published endless stories about her adjustment, or lack thereof. For Paris, those 23 days in prison became both humiliation and turning point. She later spoke about the fear and despair she felt, confessing that being locked away was the lowest point of her life. Yet, in the same breath, she admitted that it forced her to reflect on her choices, her image, and the persona she had built. Prison had stripped her down to something raw and vulnerable, a side the public rarely saw. When she was released, Paris emerged into a storm of cameras, reporters, and flashing lights. To some, she was a cautionary tale of privilege unchecked. To others, she was a victim of a system eager to make an example of her because of her fame. But whatever side people took, her time in prison permanently altered her public image. She was no longer just the untouchable heiress. She was a woman whose mistakes had caught up with her in the most public way possible. In the years that followed, Paris tried to rebuild. She continued modeling, DJing, and expanding her business empire, but the specter of her prison time never fully left. Every article about her, every documentary, and every retrospective on her career inevitably included those mugshots, those days in Linwood. It became part of her mythology, the glamorous heiress who had once been humbled by prison walls. Her story is haunting, not because her crime was extraordinary, it was not, but because it showed how fragile the carefully constructed facade of fame could be. Paris Hilton had lived a life that seemed insulated from consequences, yet in that summer of 2007, the walls of a prison cell proved otherwise. The woman who had once defined carefree glamour became, for a brief but unforgettable moment, a symbol of reckoning. Paris Hilton's fall and rise reflect a broader truth about fame, that no one, no matter how wealthy or beautiful, is immune to the weight of their own choices. For her, prison was a crucible, one that transformed her from a tabloid punchline into a figure who, however reluctantly, had to face reality. Stephanie Pratt was the picture of California sunshine when she first burst into the public eye. Born into a wealthy family in Los Angeles, she grew up in the glow of privilege and possibility. Her older brother, Spencer Pratt, had already made his name in the tabloids through his reality TV antics, and when Stephanie joined the cast of The Hills, she was instantly recognizable. With long blonde hair, a bright smile, and a designer wardrobe, she embodied the aspirational lifestyle so many young people dreamed of. For a time, Stephanie was not just a supporting character on a reality show. She was a brand in her own right, gracing magazine covers, appearing at high-profile events, and building a reputation as one of the faces of Los Angeles youth culture. But behind the cameras, the cracks were beginning to show. Reality TV fame can be intoxicating, but it is also fleeting, and Stephanie struggled to maintain her footing as the pressure of public scrutiny mounted. Long nights out became longer still, and the world that had once celebrated her image began to whisper about her excesses. The whispers became headlines when, in 2006, she was arrested in Hollywood for shoplifting $300 worth of clothing from Neiman Marcus. For many, it was baffling. Why would someone with wealth and fame risk everything for a petty crime? Her mugshot, widely circulated in the media, showed a young woman who seemed more lost than malicious, caught in the chaos of her own unraveling. After pleading guilty, Stephanie was sentenced to probation and ordered to attend counseling. For a while, it seemed like the arrest might be nothing more than a youthful mistake that could be left in the past. She continued on the hills, even gaining sympathy from some fans who saw her as a young woman trying to find her place in a world that thrived on tearing its stars apart. Yet the demons she wrestled with did not vanish so easily. By 2009, she was once again in the headlines, this time for driving under the influence after leaving a party. Police pulled her over when she swerved across lanes, and tests revealed she was intoxicated. She was arrested and later released on $5,000 bail, but the damage to her reputation was done. Stephanie's arrest added her to a growing list of young Hollywood personalities whose fame seemed inseparable from scandal. The narrative of privilege gone wrong became the lens through which the media reported her every move. For Stephanie herself, the incident was another low point in a spiral that she seemed unable to control. Reality TV amplified her mistakes, replaying her confrontations, her tears, and her reckless choices for millions of viewers. The glamour of Hollywood had turned into a pressure cooker, and Stephanie was caught in the heat. The trial that followed her DUI was not dramatic in the way that murder trials or celebrity embezzlement cases might be, but it was no less damning for her public image. She pled no contest and was ordered to attend mandatory alcohol education classes, pay fines, and extend her probation. In interviews afterward, Stephanie admitted that she struggled with substance abuse, and that the world of reality TV often enabled destructive behavior rather than discouraging it. Still, for fans and critics alike, the arrests marked a turning point. Stephanie was no longer just a reality star. She was a cautionary tale about the cost of fame, indulgence, and the lack of accountability that often comes with privilege. In the years that followed, Stephanie attempted to rebuild her life. She spoke openly about her battles with addiction, trying to frame her story as one of recovery rather than destruction. She moved to London for a time, where she found a quieter form of celebrity on Made in Chelsea, a British reality show. There, she reinvented herself as an international socialite, but the shadow of her past never completely lifted. Interviews with her often circled back to the same questions. What drove her to steal when she had money? Why risk her life and others on the road with alcohol? And what role did fame itself play in pushing her toward the edge? For Stephanie, the aftermath was complicated. She did not serve long stretches in prison, but her time behind bars, even short stays connected to her arrests, left an impression. She has spoken about the humiliation, the fear, and the way her choices led her to places she never imagined. She lost endorsements, tarnished her public reputation, and carried the stigma of her record wherever she went. Fame had made her mistakes public, and prison, however brief, had made them permanent. Today, Stephanie Pratt exists in a liminal space between nostalgia and infamy. To some, she's a reminder of the golden days of reality television, when The Hills was the cultural obsession of an entire generation. To others, she's a symbol of how fame can consume rather than uplift, exposing the vulnerabilities of those least prepared to handle it. The reflection her story leaves behind is sobering. Wealth and fame are not antidotes to personal demons, and often, they only magnify them. The haunting question is whether Stephanie's downfall was inevitable in the world she grew up in. Did the cameras push her to become someone she wasn't, or did they simply reveal what was already there? Whatever the answer, her story is a stark reminder that the distance between Hollywood glamour and a prison cell is shorter than anyone imagines. And for Stephanie Pratt, that distance was crossed in the blink of a flashbulb. Jeremy Meeks's rise to fame was unlike anything Hollywood or the fashion world had ever seen. Before the cameras loved him, the law knew him well. He was born in Tacoma, Washington, but raised mostly in Stockton, California, a city long known for its crime rate and economic struggles. From a young age, Jeremy's life was marked by hardship. His father was in prison for murder, and his family struggled to make ends meet. Without much guidance, Jeremy slipped into a world where survival often meant bending or breaking the law. By his teenage years, he had already accumulated a criminal record. Arrests for theft, fights, and gang affiliations became part of his identity. For law enforcement, Jeremy was just another repeat offender from a broken city. But for the people who knew him personally, he was something else. Charismatic, soft-spoken at times, and undeniably striking in appearance. His sharp blue eyes and chiseled jawline stood out even when dressed in county jail orange. That appearance became his accidental ticket to fame in 2014. At the age of 30, Jeremy was arrested in a gang sweep by Stockton police and charged with felony possession of a firearm, among other offenses. Normally, this would have been just another minor headline in a city overwhelmed with crime reports. But when the Stockton Police Department posted his mugshot to their Facebook page, the internet reacted in a way no one expected. The image spread like wildfire. Overnight, Jeremy became known as the hot felon. Social media users gushed over his looks. Some joking they would commit crimes just to be locked up with him, others seriously debating whether someone so attractive could really be dangerous. His mugshot was shared millions of times, and within days, modeling agencies and talent scouts were expressing interest. For the first time in his troubled life, Jeremy wasn't being defined by his rap sheet, he was being defined by his face. Still, beneath the memes and viral fascination, the reality was grim. Jeremy was sentenced to 27 months in federal prison. For him, those years were not glamorous. Locked away, he had time to reflect on the strange duality of his situation. The world outside was clamoring to turn him into a star, but inside, he was just another inmate. He served his sentence in Nevada and tried to stay out of trouble, understanding that his unusual fame might give him a second chance once he was free. When he was released in 2016, the prediction came true. Almost immediately, Jeremy signed with a modeling agency. He appeared in fashion magazines, walked on runways in Milan, and even landed high-profile brand deals. For a moment, it seemed like he had completely flipped his life story, from gang member to global fashion icon. Interviews painted him as reformed, grateful for his second chance, and determined not to go back to prison. But not everything was picture perfect. Jeremy's sudden success created tension in his personal life. His marriage crumbled, with his wife publicly accusing him of abandoning his family after tasting fame. Paparazzi captured him on yachts with wealthy women, reinforcing a narrative that he had traded one life of excess for another. Though no new arrests defined his post-prison years, skeptics wondered if his reinvention was genuine or just another performance in a world that loved bad boys with redemption arcs. The public reaction was divided. Some celebrated Jeremy as proof that people could change, that a man once destined for a cycle of arrests and poverty could rise to become a millionaire model. Others criticized the system that allowed him to benefit from crime, asking why someone who broke the law was rewarded with fame while countless others languished in prison unnoticed. His story forced people to confront uncomfortable questions about beauty, privilege, and the nature of redemption. Even in his modeling career, the specter of his past never fully disappeared. Articles always referred to him as the hot felon, never just as Jeremy Meeks. He was trapped between two identities, the man who once carried a gun as part of a gang and the man who now wore designer suits on runways. That tension gave his story a haunting undertone. Could he ever truly escape his past, or would he always be defined by the mugshot that made him famous? As of today, Jeremy continues to work in fashion and has even branched into acting. He is wealthier, more successful, and more visible than he ever could have imagined during his youth in Stockton. Yet the reflection his story leaves is uneasy. It shows how quickly the world can flip its perception of someone, how beauty can alter narratives of crime, and how redemption is sometimes more about public fascination than personal transformation. The chilling takeaway is that Jeremy Meeks's fame was built not in spite of his crimes, but because of them. If his mugshot had never gone viral, his story might have ended in obscurity after prison. Instead, it became a cultural phenomenon, raising questions about what society chooses to celebrate and what it chooses to ignore. Jeremy walked out of prison into a world eager to forgive him for reasons that had little to do with justice or rehabilitation, and everything to do with how he looked in a single photograph. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Was it the petty theft that spiraled into something larger, or the sudden transformation of a convicted felon into a fashion icon? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective helps shape the way we explore these haunting true crime stories.